Alrighty, what's up guys, Single Player Nacho here. Secretive, mysterious, and otherwise scrapped. We all love Resident Evil games for their memorable characters and crap your pants terrifying enemies. But what happens when a design is just too obscure, or when an enemy type is just so secretive they have one little missing detail about their development? We'll be looking at enemies that belong in a trash bin, not literally, most of them are actually pretty cool designs, and we'll throw in some secretive type enemies in there as well that did make the cuts. Without further ado, let's get to it. First up, Resident Evil 2 Remake, The Condemned. I could not think of a more perfect name to give this heinously designed monster. With the appearance of a malnourished child, barely clothed, and surgical braces around its neck, it's really hard to describe what we're looking at besides just saying hell or the devil. Now, the Condemned were slated to appear in the orphanage section of Resident Evil 2 Remake, where you play as Sherry. These things were supposed to chase you around that orphanage, jump scare you, and eat you up. The Condemned were actually replaced by Brian Irons, the Chief, a grotesque character on his own right. The developers actually stated that it was more terrifying for a gigantic human to chase you around rather than these horror-type monsters. And from a lore nerd standpoint, the Condemned are attached to the orphanage level. I think these things were experiments of Brian Irons. Just take a look at his makeshift lab and all that disgusting stuff he has in there. I wouldn't be surprised if these were slated to be his minions. After all, they were kept in cages according to the concept art. Next up, Resident Evil 4 Scrapped HOOKMAN. What you are witnessing is a version of Resident Evil 4 that never saw the light of day. It's actually mostly known as Resident Evil 3.5. This was the early build of one of my favorite games. It featured a castle, moving paintings, a black deadly fog, Silent Hill-like enemies. It's extremely astonishing to see this, and somewhat surprising of how different the route Capcom ended up taking, because this was frequent jump scares and the HOOKMAN. I don't think I'm alone in saying that the HOOKMAN looks like one of the most annoying enemies we would have had to deal with. Not only would this ghostly phantom-like nuisance of an enemy easily transport up to us, there's a locked-in QTE sequence as well, completely taking us out of the action. Bullets hardly affect this thing. I don't even know how you shoot a ghost. HOOKMAN does spawn from paintings, and there's plenty of those around Resident Evil 4's castle, so many HOOKMANs probably would have popped out of nowhere. Next up, Resident Evil Revelations 2, Mutant PEDRO. You see, PEDRO really could have been like any one of us, just a normal dude at a party, until you realize it's a B.O.W. research group's party. Pedro Fernandez and many others were kidnapped from this event. While they were knocked out, Pedro and the guests were given a very disturbing virus. How disturbing? Just look at the cute-ass residents in Same Island. These creatures you are witnessing are patient zero of this mysterious virus. Pedro wakes up and everything seems normal at first, but he, along with other survivors, are placed in this abandoned hellhole of an island. Here's where the Unexplained kicks in. This virus only evolves within the host when they are stricken with fear. What kind of sick and twisted biology lab experiments were conducted to figure this one out? I don't know. Naturally, Pedro becomes afraid of all this crazy shit he's witnessing, and boom, he mutates solely out of fear. Very mysterious stuff.
I got you! It means he's evil.
Next up, Resident Evil 0, Wesker's Monster. Thank God this furball never reached our controllers. Wesker's Monster is a scrapped version of Resident Evil 0's Eliminators, who are quite possibly the most annoying twerps we've ever had to deal with. Eliminators group up on the player and make things miserable. Wesker's monster would have been a singular gorilla-like B.O.W. who would stalk you around the training center in RE0. But why was this albino King Kong scrapped? This thing was created so early in Resident Evil 0's development that it was meant for the Nintendo 64 version, which was also scrapped. In this prehistoric version, Wesker was the main villain and needed a henchman-like monster to accompany him. It was also said that Wesker's monster was to search and kill the remaining STARS members. So we really are witnessing the evolved version of the Nemesis. When Wesker was dropped as the villain, so too was his monster, and it never saw the light of day. Next up, Resident Evil Code Veronica, ALBINOID. Yes, everyone, the reason why the ALBINOID is on this list isn't because it was scrapped, it wasn't, but because it legitimately has a butt face, like a butt for a face. The ALBINOID can be found in Code Veronica, and it stands out due to its pink and completely unexplainable design. Thankfully for us, there's a bit of explanation as to its pre-B.O.W. base form. The ALBINOID comes from salamander lizards who have evolved into an ass, and they just so happen to be very skilled at electric shocks. They reside mostly in water, and they're just very weird looking. What on earth was the thought process here? Next up, Resident Evil 7, DIANE. If ever there was a family that needed less members, it's the Baker family. Well, at least after they were infested with mold. But alas, Resident Evil 7 would have had a canine enemy had it not been ultimately scrapped. DIANE, a vicious German Shepherd, would have tied the knot between the classic Resident Evil 1 dogs and served as Lucas Baker's companion. Now, this makes zero sense. Lucas is the type of guy that would have zero empathy for dogs. Hell, he hardly cares about his own Bayou family. Though, given how twisted Lucas is, he probably would have used DIANE for molded experiments. And she'd be very, very scary indeed. In fact, she was slated to appear in that first dinner scene with the Bakers, either keeping guard over Ethan or eating the scraps of Marguerite's home cooking. Yuck. Next up, Resident Evil Revelations, Sea Creepers. The Sea Creepers have a fascinating piece of lore that is actually a bit unexplained when it comes to B.O.W. behavior. Resident Evil Revelations is filled with fishy monsters, but the Sea Creepers are exclusively women who have been infected. Here's where things get even weirder. They are referred to as Eve, the biblical figure who bit the apple. I don't know, I never read it. But also, Sea Creepers are extremely territorial monsters. Typically, Resident Evil monsters just prey and stalk when their tummies start to rumble, but the Sea Creepers, for whatever reason, hold on to the genetic makeup of a possessive fish, even after infection. Why do they need to hold their own land or water down? We may never know. Next up, Resident Evil Village, VARCOLAC Handler. Now here's an impressive piece of chunk. You're looking at the alpha male, 10 feet tall plus, VARCOLAC Handler, who's been unfortunately canned. Now if you've seen my 10 scariest monsters in Resident Evil Village video, you know how terrified I am of the VARCOLACs, those werewolves with happy faces. Well, apparently Lady Dimitrescu assigned handlers for them, which is an insane thought already. Who could possibly tame such wild beasts? Not only that, this dude is calmly holding on to 2 leashed VARCOLACs. One VARCOLAC is a pretty big nuisance in harder difficulties. They take up so much ammo to kill. The handler was definitely left off for being way too hard to deal with. Next up, Resident Evil 2 Licker Zombies. Hold on to your heads, people. This is one ugly concept. Lickers are skinless, hairless creatures with a whole lot of extra tongue, but they are actually evolved from your typical everyday zombie. What most of us would find interesting is how that transformation would look like. Well, I present to you the Licker Zombie, the in-between of 2 horrid monsters. This concept art can be unlocked within Resident Evil 2 Remake's extras, and it is quite a sight to behold. This illustration paints a vile picture of a man's body slowly transitioning into a liquor build, as the torso is elongated and of course that slimy tongue. I believe the liquor zombies were dropped in favor of those disgusting pale heads we find in the lab section of the game, which pretty much looks similar. It's just that the pale heads are naked perverts. Damned hooligans. And last but certainly not least, Resident Evil 4, Parasite Woman. Resident Evil 4 is chock filled with numerous enemy types, which is what keeps a 40+ hour walkthrough fresh. But believe it or not, even more enemies were left on the cutting room floor, including this concept art known as the Parasite Woman. An interesting detail is that the Parasite Woman is adorned in an umbrella hospital gown, and she seems pretty normal at first, but then she extends her height and grotesqueness level to 100 and becomes a giant lobster-like monster. I mean, this stuff in itself is fascinating and largely unexplained, but the art easily gives us so much detail. It's crazy. Resident Evil 4 does have a few female enemies here and there, but this one would have taken the cake. It's unknown where the Parasite Woman would have been placed or why she was scrapped, but I'm guessing the Regenerator Palace is a good start. I'm sure there's some eager fans looking to bring Plaga Lady to life to at least see what she would have been like. There's even a little graphic for her Leon kill scene. She'd use those two lobster mouth claws to separate the arms and take a bite out of Leon's face. Now that's violent. Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Which one of these scrapped or cancelled enemies would you have liked to see? Or which one did you find the most unexplainable logic towards? Comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more horror lore, lists, and mysteries. Again guys, all the support is very much appreciated. Have an awesome rest of your day. And as always, stay single.